So, recently, my wife and I went down to Bloomington to visit some friends. While we were there, her daughter, who's a photographer, decided to take some family photos. I was wondering, these are great. I should probably post these somewhere. And then, I got a pretty good idea. Let's make some picture frames. So for the people who follow my channel and want to kind of build some of the things I build, I feel like you deserve a disclaimer. I've been building since 2017, so that's about 4 years. January 2017 is when I started building, and I've built a lot of different stuff. Dressers, TV stands, bookcases, wine racks, charcuterie boards, a lot of things. And picture frames are probably the most difficult thing I've ever made, which seems so silly because it's such a small deal, but you got to get that 45-degree miter just right, and then you've got to account for the rabbet on the back side, and it's got to be deep enough to fit the glass, the picture, whatever backing you're using. There's just a lot of things that go into it, and for it to be such a small piece, everything kind of needs to be perfect because people are going to see it up close. So there's a couple different ways that I've kind of bowled through and troubleshooted my way through on how to do really good miters. The obvious choice would be the miter saw. This is a 20-inch saw blade, dual bevel, sliding miter saw. It's a nice saw. I think this was around $400 or $500 saw. I really don't use it that much. I use it mostly just for cutting things down to rough width before I start, on other parts of the project. The 45-degree angle on this gauge is not really that reliable. Just because it says 45, it could be 46 or 45.7, and those don't sound like big differences, but upon 4 angles that all need to fit together perfectly, that variance is really going to show in your final result. So if you're trying this out for yourself, I don't recommend starting with the miter saw. There are a bunch of other different ways. Most table saws will come with what's called a miter gauge. Now you can attach a block to this, set this to 45 degrees, and go through with your blade at 90. And orientating the piece right, you should turn out okay. These, just like anything else that comes with the tool, the saw blade's not very high quality when they come stock. The miter gauges are not really usually that high quality. I have since upgraded to this Craig, and you can tell this is a lot more substantial. This here versus this little guy. It's weightier. It's got the extruded aluminum. It's got the nice flat back, and it's got a very detailed, and I'll show you a zoom up on this, very detailed degree pin to dial in. And it's got a nice stop block here so you can make everything consistent. This was about $130. You don't have to have this, but I've had really good results. If you're a bit more into the hobby and you want to kind of make your own jig, I actually made this jig. It's based off of David Picciuto's video. I'll leave a link to that below. I've made some frames with it. It usually turns out okay. It's just not my favorite. I think I prefer to use the miter gauge itself. So with that disclaimer aside, check this out and we'll see if you guys can't make one too. I had a couple pieces of walnut that I did not have any other use for, so I thought they'd make some pretty good picture frames. First stop's going to be over at the table saw. I wanted my frames to be about 1 3/4 inches so I could get these ripped to width over here and then start focusing in on the rabbet. Using the thickness of the plexiglass, the backing, and adding a 1/16, I could get the width and the depth for the rabbet to house those components. Now, rabbets can be cut a number of different ways. I've seen people use routers, I've seen people use the table saw, I've seen people use a circular saw with an edge guide and then go back and chisel things out. I have a table saw, it's quick and easy for me, so that's the route I chose to take. And here you can see that rabbet start to come together. Then, as we said before, I could get the miter gauge set to 45 degrees and start making all of my cuts. Okay, so apologies for the lawnmower and kids playing. It's a beautiful day and people are outside. When it comes to cutting, this is the rabbet that the picture, the glass, and the backing is going to drop into. When it comes to measuring this out, do not measure from the inside point and do not measure from the outside point. It'll end poorly every time. What you want to do is measure from the inside arch of the rabbet. So where this piece comes down and meets here. So we'll take our ruler. We're going to be doing 8x10s. So we'll bring our ruler up, measure from the inside of the rabbet And since the picture itself is 10 inches, we want to give a little bit of leeway, so we'll do 10 and a 16th, which is 10 and 1/16, right there. And rather than have you watch me cut 56 miters, we'll do a little movie magic. As for the glue up, I actually have one of these picture frame clamps. They're super handy, but they're not very practical. You can really only use them for this. So for those of you who don't want to invest, hang out for just a little bit longer and I'll show you how you can do the exact same thing with blue tape. The blue tape method is pretty straightforward. You're just going to take each side of your frame, connect it with blue tape, put some glue in those joints, and then essentially just fold the frame in on itself. Things should come together pretty smoothly, assuming your miters aren't too far off. And even if they're not totally perfect, you can usually pull them into square with a little bit of pressure. Also, if you're liking what you're seeing, go ahead and hit that subscribe button and ring that notification bell. That really helps the channel and lets me know what kind of videos you guys are enjoying. Once everything's dry, you can come back and take off all the blue tape. This does take a while. This is another reason that clamp is super nice. It's a lot faster, but also, again, more money. We don't necessarily like spending money, so blue tape's a good option. Okay, so miters came together pretty well. A couple of them, since this one was just taped together, didn't have a whole lot of clamping pressure. So when the glue dried, it expanded and pushed the joint apart. That's nothing a little glue and sawdust won't hide up, so that one will be fine. Something to know about picture frames, miter joints, since they're in-grain to in-grain glue ups, are not very strong. Like, I mean, it's not supporting a lot of weight, but if this were to fall, it would almost certainly fall to pieces. And we don't want that. So using this jig, we're going to set this here, run it across the dado stack that's set at 1/4 inch thick, and create splines. And then we'll take this 1/4 inch walnut material. Some people use contrasting like maple or poplar or something, but I want the photo to be the star of the frame, not the the contrasting spline. But once that's cut, we'll drop that right in there, shave it flush, sand it up, and then those miter joints will be a lot stronger. It's a good idea to use clamps when you're using a spline jig. It just supports the piece a lot better and helps to keep your hands away from the blade. So real quickly, while I'm cutting out these splines, I know a lot of people don't have a bandsaw, they don't have a dado stack, and you don't have to do splines. It's totally optional. These do add a lot of support, but again, these are picture frames. They're just going to be hanging on a wall or sitting on a mantle. They're not going to be load bearing. I'm just a belt and suspenders kind of guy, so I like to take the extra step, but you certainly don't have to. Not to mention, you would totally save yourself the headache of accidentally knocking the frame to pieces while you're putting in the spline, which I definitely did on one of the smaller frames. Anyway, once these were all dried up, I could take them over to the belt sander and get those splines flushed up with the edge of the frame and start the whole sanding process. Truth be told, I didn't spend a long time sanding. Again, these aren't going to be handled very often. Just need to make sure that you're not going to get a splinter when you go to move the frame. So I hit it with 80 grit and then 120 and called that good. I did decide to add a little bit of character on it and threw a 45-degree chamfer around the outside. This really softened up the look and I was feeling it at this point. I did mention that I use plexiglass on my frames. I like to buy just a sheet and cut them to fit. You can pick this stuff up at any home store. I prefer to cut these specifically to fit my frames as opposed to buying like a real cheap frame and then using the glass and backing out of that, because it doesn't always fit. And it's important to have a nice tight fit for these. You don't want pictures rattling around. With that said, it's time for a test fit. We've got our plexiglass here, which looks like it's going to fit nice and snug, and our backer board, which also, wait for it, fits nice and snug. Once we get our finish on, we'll use some of these guys. This is a little kit I picked up off of Amazon for about $6. I'll link it down below. It's really handy. Helps hold everything in place and you don't have to work with nails or anything like that. Once we got that done, we could turn our eyes to the ledges that we'll have our picture frame sit on. I decided to keep these really simple. I basically just took the remaining walnut I had, ripped a 2-inch segment and then an 1.5 inch segment, turned it on its side, installed some dominoes and glued it together. You don't have to use dominoes. I just did for alignment because my board had a little bit of a bow in it, but you could totally use pocket hole screws or just use glue and clamp it together and that would work just fine. Again, not supporting a lot of weight. It's just keeping the picture frame from falling off. Then, since I was digging the chamfer so much on the picture frame itself, I thought it would be a good design feature to carry that look over into the ledge. And again, really softened up the look, really helped tie the two pieces together. After that, we were ready to start the finish process. I took a tack cloth, wiped everything down to get the sawdust off, and then applied 2 coats of this wipe on varnish. This is the same finish I used on the recent dresser build. It goes on really well. Just apply a heavy coat, then go back and wipe off the excess. And now we're on the home stretch. We can pre-drill for our hardware, get our picture, plexiglass, and backer in place, lock our hardware in, and these frames are ready to be displayed. To mount our shelves to the wall, we just kept it nice and simple. I used a stud finder to locate the studs behind the drywall and then transferred those marks over to the shelves, drilled a couple of pocket holes on the bottom of the shelf, and then drove those pocket holes into the studs. Pretty sturdy, and again, only holding about 6 pounds, so not a lot of weight to worry about. And unfortunately, I totally forgot to record myself attaching the 3rd shelf, but once that was on, we were ready for the B-roll. All right, guys, that's gonna do it for this week's episode. Thank you so much for following along. I am absolutely thrilled with how these came together. The miters are perfect. The shelves are really simple, but at the same time, really elegant, and I really like that look. And now I've got beautiful pictures of my family to look at every day while I'm at work. Huge shout out to Kayla. Her photography skills were on point. If you're in the Bloomington area, be sure to hit her up. Her name's Kayla Reidner. I'll leave a link to her Instagram page down below. And yeah, picture frames are difficult. They are not easy to do, even though they should be. But with a little patience and a little perseverance, we can get it figured out. So if you enjoyed the video, like, comment, subscribe. It really, really helps the channel. And until next time, get out there and get your own project started.